Respected scholars, at the outset, my pranams to one and all. Shruti Smriti Purananam Alayam Karunalayam Namami Bhagavad Pada Shankaram Loka Shankaram. Good afternoon and welcome to this August Assembly. We are assembled here in this platform today to attend the 13th lecture in the lecture series on Indian intellectual tradition being organized by the Kantaloor Sala, an institution for higher learning and research in ancient Indian wisdom. First of all, I invite Dr. Sarita Maheshwaran, Head of the Department of Sahitya, Government Sanskrit College, Pondicherry, for invocation.
Sarvebhyo namo namah. Ya srishti srashturadya vahadi vidhihutam ya havirya chahotri yedve kalam vidhatta shruti vishayaguna ya sthita vyapya vishwam ya mahu sarva bija prakritiriti yaya pranina pranavanta Pratyakshabhiprapannastanubhiravatu vastabhirashtabhirisha.
Thank you, Dr. Sarita Maheshwaran.
Thank you, sir.
Now, as we know, the Kantaloor Sala is organizing lectures regularly to unearth new areas and possibilities of study in the field of Sanskrit wisdom. It has already conducted a series of talks in Vedic and classical Sanskrit literature. All the programs were highly academic and were helpful to the students of Sanskrit language, especially to enter into the study of new areas. Today, we are going to attend a speech on yet another important topic, and it is on manuscript studies. Understanding the science of Manuscriptology has significance as far as the researches in Sanskrit is concerned, and the science has a vital role in the dissemination of Indian knowledge systems. With these words, may I enter into my duty, the welcome speech. Professor P.C. Murali Madhavan, Director-in-Chief of Kantaloor Sala, is the chair of this session. He was the head of the Department of Sanskrit Sahitya at SSCS Kaladi and also at Central Sanskrit University, Guruvayur campus, Purnatagara, Thrissur. He was brought up in an environment where Sanskrit formed a part of life. He is the backbone behind the revival of this Sala. Of course, the Sala will achieve new heights in his leadership. With all respect, I welcome Professor Murali Madhavan to this session. Our resource person today is Dr. DOMINIC GOODALL. Dr. GOODALL studied Greek, Latin, and Sanskrit. After finishing his BA Sanskrit with Pali in 1990, he came to Hamburg for 2 years to learn medieval Tamil with Professor S.A. Srinivasan. He then returned to Oxford and, under the guidance of Professor Alexis Sanderson, produced a critical edition of the opening chapters of Bhatta Ramakantha's 20th century commentary on the Kirana Tantra, which he submitted as a doctoral thesis in 1995 and subsequently published from Pondicherry in 1998. He was attached to the French Institute of Pondicherry as a junior researcher in 1996-1997 and became the head of the Pondicherry Center of the EFEO in 2002, where he remained until April 2011. Then he posted in Paris from 2011 to 2015. He gave lectures principally on Cambodian inscriptions in Sanskrit and on the history of Shaivism from unpublished sources. He's now once again posted in Pondicherry, where he continues to pursue his scholarly interests, in particular in Sanskrit poetry and in the history of the Shaiva Siddhanta. Among his publications are editions and translations of works of poetry in Sanskrit and of hitherto unpublished Shaiva scriptures and theological commentaries. Presently, he is preparing the dictionary of Tantric terminology, Tantrika Abhidhana Kosha, and a contributor to the Hamburg Encyclopedia of Manuscript Cultures in Asia and Africa. Now, he is working in the projects funded by the European Research Council, namely Dharma and Shivadharma. He is the head of the EFEO French School of Asian Studies, Pondicherry now. We are fortunate that such a great person is with us to share his ideas to the academic community. Today, he will speak on the topic, possibilities and challenges in manuscript studies and researches. Sir, with great respect and love, we, the Kantaloor Sala as a whole, welcome you to this session. Dr. Ajitan PI, faculty of Kantaloor Sala, will present the citation to Dr. Goodall. He is an emerging scholar in the field of Sanskrit, especially in Tantra literature. I welcome Dr. Ajitan to this program. Dr. G. Srividya, faculty of Sanskrit General, SSUS Kaladi, will deliver the vote of thanks in this program. She is well versed in Sanskrit and was the head of the department, and now her time is over. I welcome Dr. Srividya to this program. I welcome, as part of this program, all the dignitaries of Kantaloor Sala and all research scholars and students of Indian intellectual traditions to this assembly. Once again, hearty welcome to one and all to this program. Thank you. Once again, thanks to all. Now, I invite Professor Murali Madhavan to chair this session and to address the scholars. Sir, please.
Sadashiva Samarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Parambaram. Most beloved and respected Dr. Dominic Goodall, the illustrious scholar in various branches of Indological studies, Professor K. Ravindran, HOD of Vedic Studies, SS University, Kaladi, Professor R. Tyagarajan, who is heading the Department of Vedic Studies in our Kantaloor Sala, Dr. Sarita Maheshwaran, Dr. G. Srividya, Dr. P.A. Ajitan, Dr. Pradeep Jodi, Sri Narayanan Bhoti, Sri N. Madhavan Nambudri, other members of Board of Trustees of Kantaloor Sala Sabha, my dear colleagues and inmates in Kantaloor Sala, learned audience of Kantaloor Sala platform, online platform. Me as the director of the Kantaloor Sala, welcome you all to this August assembly and wish you all a happy New Year 2022. This New Year, we have opened our lecture series with Tantra as the topic of discussion. This is the second talk of the year 2022. Every month, we are regularly organizing two significant lectures. The lecture series, one on Indian intellectual tradition and the other one on Vedic epistemology and exegesis. A galaxy of scholars at international level presented their scholarly thoughts on various topics in Indic studies. Today, we are fortunate to get Dr. Dominic Goodall to deliver a thought-provoking lecture on manuscripts. As you all are aware, manuscript studies are the real foundation of any further serious study and research in the field of Indology. Professor Dominic Goodall's contribution to the field of Manuscriptology already explained by the welcome speaker, Professor K. Ravindran. I am not going to the details. Professor Dominic Goodall's contribution to the field of manuscriptology, history of religion, textual criticism, etc., are of great importance and significance. He was a member of French School of Asian Studies since 2000. He became head of the EFEO at Pondicherry Center in 2022. His scholarly interests in Shaivism and Sanskrit poetry are well known. I am very happy that Professor Dr. Dominic Goodall has responded our invitation to deliver this speech today. The subject is manuscripts, the possibilities and challenges in manuscript studies and research. Manuscriptology is the science dealing comprehensively with various aspects of manuscripts: preparation, collection, classification, cataloging, preservation, and utilization of manuscripts. It also deals with the method of reprography, the relation to the environment conditions, to the method of preservation of manuscripts. It is language that helped mankind to outdistance its immediately preceding ancestor, that is monkey, by helping in transferring the knowledge acquired by each generation to the succeeding one. This is not possible in the case of animals, who have no language to preserve the knowledge acquired by each generation and to transfer it to the next. This transference and preservation of knowledge is through language, which can be done through written languages or manuscripts. With the discovery and development of printing books, development of the printing, books have taken the place that the manuscripts played in earlier times. Even then, to prepare a critical edition of a text properly, restoring the text as intended by the author, collection, collation, and critical study of the variant readings, to select the original text, etc., all depend on the preservation of manuscripts. Library science and textual criticism are the two other sciences closely connected with the manuscriptology. Palm leaf manuscripts form one of the most significant part among the manuscripts collection of Sanskrit and other languages in India. There are two main varieties of palm leaves, that is Sri Thala and Karimpana, as we say in Malayalam, used for, even in Tamil, used for the preparation of manuscripts. The former is superior to the later in flexibility and durability. Both varieties are found in Kerala and Tamil Nadu. Sri Thala is found in plenty on the west coast and the other variety in the east coast, that is in Orissa and Bengal. The Karimpana has thick leaves, has its leaves spread like a fan. Each leaf consists of segments. Each segment consists of two hard, thick and smooth pleats with a hard joining through the entire length. This has been generally used in Kerala for writing horoscopes by astrologers and for temporary revenue records. For training students in writing on palm leaves, this variety was regularly used. This does not last as long as the other Sri Thala, and therefore the Sri Thala is used for writing important texts to be preserved for a long time. The Sri Thala leaf is thinner, longer, wider, and more flexible than the other. It has cross veins below the surface and can withstand incisions made while inscribing with the iron style. This leaf tapers towards the end more gently and suitable able in writing several lines on the surface. It is longer and has greater polish. It can withstand writing on both sides. That is very peculiar of it, not like Karimpala. The Karimpala leaf is double pleated with a rib joining throughout the whole length, and hence writing is only one side of each pleat. The palm leaves have to be processed to make them pliable and ready for use as writing material. The leaves are cut from young palm trees. And there are several ways of processing these palm leaves, which was actually in India, we have a different type. In Ceylon and other nations, they have a different types. In many parts of India, especially in South, writing letters on palm leaf with an iron style was the part of the general education. Different types of styles are used, and they are generally made in steel. They can also be, these styles can be in copper also, in silver or gold, with or without decorative designs. Then the different parts of the style are chhatra, that is sunshade, patra, that is leaf, nala, that is tube, ganda, the ball, and lekhini, the writing length, in the proportion of 4:2:3:1. That is totally 10. This applies to the style used in Ceylon also. In Kerala, there is a simple stylus cum knife. It is known as Eluthani Kati. It is known. The writing of the manuscript starts from the initial leaf itself. In Kerala manuscripts, the numbering of the leaves is on the left margin. The front leaf is numbered as Shri, and regularly numbering starts from the second leaf. The normal numbering is as follows. It's a na as 1, na double, it is 2, nia, that is 3, skra is 4, gra is 5, ha is 6, a 7, pra 8, dra 9, and ma 10. Further, dha, retha, dha 20, la, that is 30, pada, pata, pada, that is 40, ba 50, tra 60, through 70, cha 80, acha, cha, and na 90, and nya 100. The Malayalam numbering are also used. In some rare cases, ka 1, ka 2, key 3, key 4, etc. are also used. The punctuation, there are several peculiarities in various regions in India. In Kerala, you can see in writing various peculiarities we can come across. Punctuation are sometimes omitted. Full stops are generally used as the end of the sentence and the verse. Avagraha sign to indicate the elision of A before E or O is often ignored, except in manuscripts carefully written. In carefully written manuscripts, we can see all those things. But generally, we see that these are omitted or ignored. To indicate an insertion, a Kagapada or Hamsapada is placed before a line, not below as in the modern practice. Short delections of letters are indicated by dots placed near it, and long delections by brackets at the beginning and end of the passage. Nasal and anuswara are indicated by dots or small circle. While writing Prakrit passages in Kerala manuscripts, there is a peculiar convention. A small circle placed before a consonant indicates doubling of the following consonant. That is a very peculiar one in Kerala. Ramapanivada explains it at the beginning of his commentary on the Prakrita Prakasha, edited from the Adayar Library by C. Kunjan Raja. The normal Anuswara sign is a small circle to the right of the consonant, a similar sign before a consonant to indicate its doubling. That is told by Dr. C. Kunjan Raja, stated by C. Kunjan Raja. Thus, you can see this type of writing model there in several manuscripts, especially in Prakrita manuscripts. Some manuscripts indicate the date of composition of the work of the or the date of copying, giving the year, month, and date, sometimes with more details. The details of the scribe or his patron may be given. Sometimes the Kali date also given in Bhuta Sankhya. Bhuta Sankhya system of notation. Just like ear, eye, hand, all these two, arrows, 5, etc. like that. Sometimes it is given according to the Katapayadi system. Just like a Ka1, Gha2, Ga3, Gha4, etc. Some statements of the scribe about the difficulty incurring in transcribing the possibility of mistaking on his part is also found, as well as the defects in the original used by him. So several drawbacks in writing, these are being reflected and sometimes mentioned and sometimes seek pardon. As well as the defects in the original used by him. There is an advice to preserve the manuscripts carefully from water, oil, and fire, especially from borrowers. How manuscripts should be carefully preserved is also sometimes indicated. Some serious demands and directions found are quoted here. I'm quoting some. Bhugna Prashtha, Katigrivaha, Stabdha Drishtihi, Athomukhaha, Kashtena Likhidam Grandham, Yatnada Paripalaye. This is Sanskrit, simple Sanskrit, so I am not explaining in English. Aksharam yad paribhrashtam, matra hinam jayad bhavet, chandum arhandi vidwamsaha, shamahi vidusham, kalakradam abaratham, chandum arhandi sanda, etc. like that. It is also made remember that good people are in the habit of pardoning the mistakes crept in due to the speed of copying and at times by carelessness. Bindu durlibi visarga vidhiga shringa pankti pada bheda dushanam hasta vegaja abuddhi purvagam chandu marahatha samikshya sajjana. So the cry of the manuscripts for protection, that is very important, is also found. I think this type of culture we cannot see in any other language, in any other manuscript repository. I think this is a peculiarity of India. The manuscript is crying loudly, Tailadraksha, Jaladraksha, Rakshamam, Shraddha Bandhanat, Yajagad, Satatam Raksha, Idi Rodadi Pustakam. So, finally, it is seen in several manuscripts. How a teacher taught most careful in Hushyam Sadapatyavat, Paragarad Dakshyam Ja Sukshetravat, Samshodhyam Vranitangavat, Pradidinam Drishyam Cha Sanmitravat, Badhyam Badhavad, Ashratham Dhada Gunaihi, Smaryam Harer Namavat, Naivam Sidati Pustakam Ghalu, Sada Pedad Gurunam Vachaha. The words of the teachers as we indicated in this verse, the direction given to his own disciple, that is very interesting and very peculiar in our tradition. Now, reprographic methods like xeroxing and microfilming and also are useful and are generally restored nowadays. The ancient method was to engage scribes to copy old manuscripts. Later, transcribing on paper was used. In fact, this was the method used for a long time. One advantage was that the scribe could transcribe into Devanagari script, the script text written in other scripts like Malayalam, Grantha, Tamil, Telugu, etc. By using proper chemicals, brittle manuscripts can be flexible and made has a unique manuscript of Umvega's commentary on Kumarila Bhatta's Shloka Vartika. This has been published. This is a very interesting incident. That is why I'm quoting this. This has been published by Madras University. At that time, the palm leaf manuscript could not be used directly since it was too brittle. The edition has to depend on an earlier transcript. Later, when they made a revised edition, they were able to make use of the palm leaf manuscripts since it has been chemically treated and made flexible. This is possible. That is what I want to say. This helped them in getting many better readings. Some portions supposed to be missing in the original could also be obtained intact. Many modern manuscript libraries try to preserve the palm leaf manuscripts by keeping them in air-conditioned rooms. This is to some current at night or due to failure of the supply, lest some short circuit may destroy the collection. This, the experts say, is bad for manuscripts. The fluctuations in temperature affecting the life of manuscripts. Dusting, punctuating, and oiling are restored to in some libraries. The normal life of a palm leaf manuscript is about 500 years. It is a rough calculation, that's all. Though exceptionally some may last longer, or some may less also. Dating the manuscripts on the basis of date given in the colophon, etc., may not always be correct, since the copyist may be copying the date from the exemplar used. From ancient times, kings and religious muds, temples, and aristocratic families, and the individual scholars were interested in collecting, preserving, and utilizing manuscripts. In Kerala, many of the royal families and aristocratic Brahmin families, even Kshatriya families, were not only repertories of manuscripts, but also served as universities, were as a deserving and poor scholars, poor students, and even teachers, those who have no facility outside, they can come to these Brahmin families, which serve as a university, to work on these manuscripts. When a king is defeated in battle, that is one of the very interesting historical aspects. His library was taken by the victorious king as a precious collection. They preserved it. In Kerala, when King Martandavarma defeated the Raja of Ambalapuzha, Devanarayana, Martandavarma, the most king, the most precious and huge library of Devanarayana was shifted by Martandavarma to Trivandrum, to his collections. In many parts of India, during the Navaratri, manuscripts and books are cleaned and worshipped as the part of Saraswati Puja. Gift of manuscripts to scholars was considered as a meritorious deed. Most of the important manuscript libraries in India had trained scribes to preserve copies of old and rare manuscripts. Most of the manuscript libraries have their own modern devices for manuscripts. We have seen a great momentum in the preservation and utilization of manuscripts in 20th century. The valuable services of great libraries should be remembered always in this field. The great institution, National Mission of Manuscripts at Delhi, under Government of India, from its inception, they worked hard as a team to prepare, to preserve and utilize manuscripts in our country. The number of manuscripts collected and preserved by Namami, National Mission of Manuscripts, it is supersedes, exceeds the number more than a billion. The great chain of institutions for collection and preservation opened by Namami throughout the country made vital contribution in the field. With these some stray observations, I beg to remain. We are all anxious to hear Dominic Goodall, his scholarly presentation. We are happy. Once again, I express my gratitude to Dr. Dominic Goodall ji for accepting our invitation to deliver the lecture. Thank you. Thank you, one and all.
Thank you, sir, so much for the scholarly presentation on the science of manuscriptology. You have presented the materials used for manuscript studies in ancient times, and as well as all respects with regard to the manuscript studies. Once again, I thank you. Now it's the time for the lecture today, and I invite Dr. Dominic Goodall to deliver the lecture on the topic possibilities and challenges in manuscript studies and research. Sir, please.
So thank you very much indeed, Professor Ravindran, Professor Murali Madhavan, all these familiar faces. Very nice to see you here today. Many things topics have been covered or adumbrated by Professor Murali Madhavan just now. I will show a PowerPoint, and I think I'm going to divide my talk into 3 sections, really. One is to talk about obvious discoveries, of solitary manuscripts with exceptional content that have survived over a long period. Another is to talk about obvious, well-known pieces of literature which we think of as familiar, but in fact, when we start to examine the manuscript evidence, we find that there is much more work that could be done on the basis of manuscripts. And the third thing that I was going to do was just to talk about the resources that are available. Maybe I will put that in the middle section. So this topic, of course, is absolutely vast. I could really talk about anything at all with such a topic. But I thought that, as I say, I would start with a kind of exceptional case. This manuscript that you see here, it's a manuscript of a text called the Nishwasa Samhita, and it survives in the National Archives in Kathmandu. And like a lot of manuscripts in Kathmandu, it's been able to survive for a very long time because of the cool, dry climate of the Kathmandu Valley. So Professor Murali Madhavan was just referring to palm leaf manuscripts surviving 500 years maximum. I think that may be conditions in Kerala. I have the impression that here in coastal Tamil Nadu, it is much less than that. The oldest dated manuscripts in the collection in Pondicherry here seem to belong to the 1780s. Of course, many of the manuscripts are not dated, so it's difficult to tell, and one cannot be certain, as you mentioned, sir, from the dates given in colophons. But I have the impression that there are not very many manuscripts from this area surviving in this area, which are older than about 300 years. So, but in the cool, dry climate of the Kathmandu Valley, there are some exceptional survivals. And so one of the things that one can very obviously do with manuscripts is return to a point in the past so far back that it seems incredible. This manuscript I have worked on for many years with a lot of different colleagues, and one small part, well, a large part covering several dozen folios was published with my professor Alexis Sanderson and Harunaga Isaacson, Divakaracharya now in Oxford, and Nirajan Kafle, now back in Kathmandu, and several others. And another part covering also a number of folios has been published by Nirajan Kafle. But we still have more than 2/3 of the remainder of the manuscript to edit, because even though it is just one manuscript that is an independent witness, it's very difficult to interpret the text. And there are many places where the manuscript is damaged, and there are no less than 3 20th century apographs, that's to say, attempts to produce exact copies of this manuscript in different places. One in the Wellcome Institute in London, one in Kathmandu, and one in Italy somewhere. Anyway, this text is very extraordinary survival. Usually when we talk about the canon of the Shaiva Siddhanta, there is this list of 28 agamas, or 28, 10 Shiva Bhedas and 18 Rudra Bhedas. And we find what I've given you there is the list of the 10 and the 18, that's to say one of several versions of this list. And I've just highlighted in red the cases where we have old materials that really go back to the first millennium or thereabouts. And the ones that are in red and in bold, these are cases where we have either complete or at least fragmentary manuscripts that are manuscripts transmitting these texts, which go back to the first millennium or shortly thereafter. And you can see from that list that that the Nishwasa is in a very select company. There are really only very few Shaiva Tantras for which we have such ancient testimony that are in this list of 28. So we have some others which are not in this list of 28, and that is another story. So you see the Parameshwara Samhita, for example. There is a 9th century manuscript, very fragmentary, surviving in Cambridge, again from Nepal. Swayambhava, there is a less ancient manuscript surviving again in Kathmandu. And Kirna, there is a manuscript dated to 924 AD, surviving again in Kathmandu. For the others, the Raghuvamsha, Parakya, we have a lot of ancient testimony, that's to say, big labeled quotations in works by particularly Kashmirian authors of the 10th and 11th centuries. And then some old manuscripts, but not nearly as old as the 9th century Nishwasa. Yes, the Nishwasa, furthermore, is so this is mentioned in Cambodian inscriptions, albeit rather obliquely. So here is a verse which I've highlighted on the screen from a 10th century inscription describing a certain person who calls himself Shivacharya. And here's the verse in which he explains how he received the name Shivacharya. Naishwasa Mandalin Diksham Naishtikacharya Tarpanim Shivacharya Bidhanardhyam Yobhi Sheka Vidho Dadhao, which I've tried to translate there. In his ceremony of consecration, Abhisheka Vidhao, he received Dadhao, an initiation, Diksham, involving the mandala of the Nishwasa, Nishwasa Mandalim Diksham, and conferring the condition of being an acharya for life. Naishtikacharya Adpanim, and this initiation was further enriched by the bestowal of the name Shivacharya upon him, Shivacharya Abhidhana Dham. Yes, just to remind you, I'm talking about an inscription from Cambodia, which is an area we all hear of a great deal, but maybe do not know so well. Several countries here in this region of South Asia, Vietnam, Laos in the north, Thailand, Cambodia. Here's a physical map from a publication of the 1890s, I think. And you can see, so the place we always hear about is Angkor, which is not, and we usually hear just about the temple known as Angkor Wat today, formerly a Vishnu temple. But in fact, it's a conurbation with lots and lots and lots of extraordinary monuments from a span of 4 centuries or so. And there are plenty of other sites in which there are ancient monuments, and some of them are Previ here, for example, on the Thai border. This is the Dangrek mountain range. This site of Wat Phu is a site famous because of a temple of Bhadreshwara, which is the major Shaiva temple of the entire region. And that is in today's Laos. So it's in the south of Laos. Here's the Mekong River, the Ganga of this region. And this enormous lake here is a seasonal lake that swells and shrinks according to the rains, the Tonle Sap. So the inscription I was showing you from, I seem to remember, is from this region. There are all kinds of discoveries to be made in this Nishwasa Tattva Samhita, and I'm not going to go through them because we have been publishing them and there is much more to come still. But one of the indications of the antiquity of this text is a rather fascinating passage, sometimes in slightly difficult and peculiar, irregular Sanskrit, which explains how the sadhaka should make his body into the shape of each of the letters in turn, R, E, E, U, and so forth, all the way through the alphabet. And I've just picked out a couple of letters there because they are, I think there are several others that are like this. These letter descriptions indicate that the letters that the sadhaka is supposed to imitate with his body are Gupta or early post-Gupta type letters of northern India. And so I think this indicates a high degree of antiquity. All kinds of other things are curious about this Nishwasa Tattva Samhita. So I think we see all kinds of doctrinal peculiarities, that's to say things which have not been, we do not find in other texts that have survived through later manuscripts. And I think that this is because several of those other texts are either later or they have been very much modified over time. So for people who know about the Shaiva Siddhanta and its evolution, it's very surprising, for example, to see that this text does not mention Mala or Arnava Mala. Usually the doctrine, well-known doctrine, is that we have 3 Pashas. One is Arnava Mala, one is Karman or Karma Mala, one is Maya or Mayiya Mala. And this Arnava Mala is simply not mentioned anywhere. I think also in the various layers, you can see differing degrees of antiquity. And the earliest layer seems to be the so-called Mula Sutra, which is a book of 8 chapters. And in that, we find no presentation of the familiar ladder of tattvas. And then in subsequent books, we see lists first of 11 tattvas, then 32 tattvas, and then 36 tattvas, which, as you may know, if you've read anything about Shaivagama, is the classical list of 36, incorporating the 25 tattvas of the of Sankhya thinkers, plus a number of others at the top of the universe, which are added to this scheme. So I think that there are many things which are very different about this agama. Another thing that is significantly absent is a description of a social dimension to the religion. So I think if you're used to seeing Shaiva agamas published from the south of India in Grantha script or produced in editions of the 20th century, then you would have seen that there is a lot of accounts of particular utsavas that take place in a temple context, and a lot of references to things that happen within the temple, where the Rudraganikas dance, which ragas we should use for the dancing, which type of music, all kinds of social elements, you could say. Let's say things, references to the way a Shaiva temple was supposed to function and how different communities played a part in the rituals. All of this is not present in this Nishwasa Samhita, and one has the impression that it is a very much, it belongs to a phase of the religion in which yogic sadhana and mantra sadhana was prominent, but there was very little account taken of social dimensions of the religion. Okay, so that's all I was going to say about the Nishwasa, because the reason why I incorporate the Nishwasa into a lecture on manuscripts is because it seems to me it's paradigmatic of these exceptional cases where one extraordinary manuscript survives, and it gives us a huge wealth of evidence about the past. All kinds of things which we couldn't really know from any other source. And it's, I think, very obvious in such cases that this is a fascinating document that deserves editing and careful study. But there are all kinds of other cases of texts which are extremely well known, of which we have maybe many editions, and yet we do not necessarily think of them as texts where there are big gains to be made by studying manuscripts. And this is often a mistake, because there are such gains to be made. But before I move into that area, I just thought that I would say something about the resources that are now available online for manuscripts. Often in the past, when I've been asked to talk about the work that I do, the manuscripts that I study, people say to me, but how did you discover these things? How do you find these manuscripts? And the answer in the past was always, well, I trawled through catalogs, I traveled a lot, I photographed things whenever I was given permission, which was not always, or I photocopied. And all of that is, of course, expensive and time-consuming. But there has been a slow revolution that's brought a lot of manuscripts within relatively easy reach. So the reason why I have this slide on the screen is because I feel this is really near the beginning of this revolution. All kinds of people from the late 1990s were trying to produce digital images and then to put them online. And the French Institute in 2007 managed to post up these 1,144 Devanagari manuscripts, and they are still online and still accessible, and that's marvelous. It means that that little collection is now available to anybody who wishes. Also relatively early on in this revolution, in Tokyo, the Sanskrit manuscripts of the Institute of Oriental Culture in Tokyo put its manuscripts up, largely Buddhist holdings. And as you see the site, you really need Japanese, except that now you do not need Japanese because we have all these extraordinary tools, Google Translate and so forth. The Manuscript Library in Cambridge has started, it's now only a pilot database, but it started putting up manuscripts which are catalogued with complete range of images. You see at the top of the screen there, 4 out of 268. You can see the entire manuscript here online with superb quality photographs that you can enlarge to a point where you really see every little anfractuosity in the shape of each letter. Very extraordinary resource. Unfortunately, as I say, still only a pilot database. And you must also know about the Nepal German manuscript cataloging project. Here you cannot see the manuscripts, but you can still find catalog details about an enormous quantity of manuscripts which were microfilmed in the from 1970 to into the 2000s by in collaboration between the German and the Nepalese governments. And given the extraordinary significance of the Kathmandu Valley because of its climate in the preservation of a lot of ancient literature, this is a truly astounding collection of documents. So even now, of course, now you have to still write to people in Nepal or in Berlin or in Hamburg to actually get the documents, but you can find a lot of the information online through their catalogue. As you see, some 5.3 million folios, 200,000 manuscripts, half of which are in Sanskrit. Very remarkable collection. One should mention also the long-running and very precious endeavors of the new Catalogos Catalogorum. I forget now how many volumes have appeared, but a very considerable number under Professor Senior Das. This, of course, informs one about so many things about Sanskrit literature. And again, this doesn't help you to actually get the manuscripts, but you can find out about them. All these resources didn't exist when I started. And now, so I used to always stop my presentation of what was available online with a lament that there wasn't very much else, people didn't seem to be following. But now I see that there are private institutions who are doing a great deal of work and putting it up online for free distribution. So this e-Gangotri posts all the images, lots of Kashmirian manuscripts, which are put straight into archive.org. And so with a little bit of creative searching and patience, you can find manuscripts of every domain of interest, mostly in Sharda or Devanagari. And as you see, there is also this blog of e-Gangotri. And there I selected this page because it seems Professor Murli Madhavan was mentioning the National Mission for Manuscripts. That seems to be announced on the 1st of November 2021. Most amazing news of the decade in Indic archiving history. All NMM data will be online in a year. I don't know whether this is really going to happen, but because there's a lot of data after all, but this would be another game changer if it happens. Yes, so I was mentioning that e-Gangotri tends to put things up online. You do a little bit of searching in archive.org and you find just hundreds of things that you couldn't really have found 10 years ago. So just chosen at random, a manuscript of a Kadambari, a Visham Padavivirti on the Kadambari. You can read every folio of it here, all beautifully photographed and put up online, and you can download it. Yes, and closer to home in Kerala, there are such endeavors. The British Library, for now several years, has run what it calls an Endangered Archives program. And in the Endangered Archives program, it invites people to photograph what they perceived to be endangered archives, and then photographs are put up on the British Library website for free access. And of course, one of the endeavors that many of you will know about or maybe are involved in is the Sanskrit and Malayalam manuscripts from the Thrissur monastic complex. So my colleagues Hugo David and SAS Sharma from this institution, together with the Thrissur monastic complex and several other people have been involved in this in different ways for some while. And whereas the British Library doesn't actually require all kinds of very detailed cataloging data, in some cases such data is given, and this is one of these cases. So here I can browse through all the manuscripts that have hitherto been posted. And I see, for example, this caught my eye, the Shivagyana Deepika. And I can find a little catalog entry. And I can also, as you see at the bottom here of the screen, view images from this file. So I can go in and I can find, indeed, beautifully legible photographs of every leaf. And I could now discover, if I had a little bit of time, exactly which Shivagyana this is, and try and see whether it has been edited, what parts of it have been edited, what kind of materials it contains. In other words, it seems to me now that we are witnessing in these years a sort of explosion in the possibilities. Before, it was a matter of traipsing around the country, looking in printed catalogs, spending a lot of time sometimes drinking tea with different people, trying to persuade authorities to give permission to photograph or to photocopy. And all of this was very, very often very difficult and frustrating, sometimes led to extraordinary connections and was great fun in certain respects. But now this has become even further, I would say, democratized. That's to say, the power is coming to everybody if they are interested, to find interesting resources online and to work with them. Okay, so that was the end of that. That was a sort of digression, the second part of my lecture. The third part of my lecture, I hope I still have enough time, by the way, and please do let me know if I'm likely to run over, because I can easily stop. The second part of, the third part of my lecture is familiar to many of you, I fear, which is to talk about the Raghuvamsha. So why the Raghuvamsha? I talk about the Raghuvamsha because it is a text very dear to my heart. I have been reading it and reading it and reading it for many years, never seemed to find an end of discoveries to make, and also passages which appeal to me in different ways at different times of one's life. One reads every section with new perspective according to what happens in one's own life. And it is one of those texts which I think we all think of as in every library shelf. There it is, dozens of editions from the early 19th century, several through each decade probably, all the way through students' editions and so forth, up to the present day. But most of these editions are either student editions with notes and a little bit of English commentary or English translation, or they're editions with Mallinatha's commentary. There are, of course, there are exceptions, and there are a few other commentaries that have been published. A commentary by Hemadri was published by Raghuvamsha Dvivedi. The same scholar, Raghuvamsha Dvivedi, has published a critical edition of the Raghuvamsha, and in fact, a critical edition of the works of Kalidasa, the Kalidasa Granthavali. We have also an edition of a commentary by Jina Samudra, and from Tripunitra, we have Aruna Girinatha and Narayana Pandita, two commentaries from Kerala. And more recently, a partial commentary by somebody called Sarvagya Pandita, if I can remember his name, or Sarvagya Vanamuni, also from Kerala. So there are a few other commentaries, but if you look in the new Catalogorum, to which I was referring earlier, you can see that there are some 50 pre-modern commentaries on the Raghuvamsha. And the one that is overwhelmingly concentrated upon is that of Mallinatha. And so we have this illusion, I think, or many people have the illusion that if you want to read Kalidasa's Raghuvamsha, all you need to do is go to the shelf and pull off one of these editions with Mallinatha's commentary. But the situation is really much more complicated than that if you are interested really in trying to get close to what Kalidasa might have written, because If you look in an edition with a lot of variants, like one of Rajavallabhati editions, for example, or in the famous edition of Nandar-Gikar, of which there are many reprints, all slightly different, but the third or fourth edition, for example, of Nandar-Gikar's edition, you can see that there is a lot of variation. Furthermore, you can see that this variation is not just of this or that akshara being confused. It is big variation, that's to say wholly different verses which stand in one manuscript, you find this verse, in another manuscript, you find an entirely different verse. Or you have large sections in which the verses are ordered differently. So many, many big variations of the kind which cannot be explained by accidental copying mistakes. And so the question arises, how can we discover what it might have been that Kalidasa wrote? And the answer, of course, is that you cannot wholly answer that question ever. But you can do an enormous amount of work, given how many thousands of manuscripts there are of commentaries and of the text itself. And so what I'm showing you on the screen is what may be the earliest, a fragment from a very, very fragmentary manuscript that may be the earliest manuscript to transmit the Raghuvamsha. And you can see it's an edition by a lady called Margarita Taticchi, which is put in the back of a book by Professor Gnoli on Udbharta's commentary on the Kavya Alankara of Bhamaha. So literary and historical documents from Pakistan. It's from a place, I believe, called Kafir Court. And the two authors of this book give rather wildly different dates for these fragments. So it's rather unclear when they're to be dated from. And if you, what you see above there is these are the fragments that you can read. You can see very little indeed. And then the rest of that is lost. And then the next line, bit of a line that you can half read is the word shtambha. And then you could read Mayena Patrina Hridikshito Gotrabid Apya Marshana, and then we lost a large chunk. So there are whole chapters which are missing. So there's very little indeed that is there. But even the bits that are there reveal big differences between this text and the text on which Mallinatha commented. And well, so I've said that the date of this thing is very difficult to determine. If you just look at it like that immediately, and you have some experience with Kashmirian manuscripts, you might, and this was my reaction, simply say, oh, well, it looks like a Sharada manuscript. It could be of pretty much any date. But if you start to look at it a bit closer again, I think that you can see that these are not regular forms. So this, the first one that maybe I go back, that is a tra, and in Sharada Lipi, from many centuries already, the ra does not flip back like that, as it does in Nepalese scripts, but it curls over and comes forward. Similarly, this is, so you can see it's the word gotra, in fact, gotra. There's again an o. You can see that it consists of what we have in Devanagari still, this kind of vowel matra and a little descendant below the line after the letter, very like a Devanagari o. But in Sharada, this is not the way an o is written. The o is rather a detached eyebrow, which hovers above the letter and is not attached to it. Similarly, so this is the letter me, I think, and you can see that it's a Prishtamatra A, which comes before the letter. But that is not the way this is done in Sharada. Sharada has instead a sloping line, which again hovers above the letter and is not attached to it. So just by way of contrast, I attach a leaf which I found online from the Bakshali manuscript. The Bakshali manuscript is a very famous manuscript for some people. It's said to be the earliest document surviving from the Indian world related to mathematics. And so there have been a lot of scholarly publications about this thing, and at least 2 complete editions. And people are very excited about this manuscript for different reasons. But I think in 2017, there was some Oxford University multidisciplinary attempt to date the thing on the basis of carbon-14 and I don't know what, but certain scientific procedures. And they came up, unfortunately, with 3 different date ranges, which more or less covered the entire first millennium. So I think there was through the 3rd and 4th century was one, and then 6th, 7th, or 8th was another, and then 8th or 9th was the third. In other words, by analyzing different fragments, they came up with different dates for different parts of the Bakshali manuscript, which surprised everybody. And one wonders whether it's really true. But what I wanted to indicate to you here is the O in the Bakshali manuscript, and you can see it's very different from the O in this manuscript of the Raghuvamsha from Kafur Court. And here is an A. This is the standard Sharda way of doing an A. It's just a slanted line detached, floating above the letter. And here's an A, again, this is the letter Me in this manuscript from Kafur Court. Clearly, I would say the manuscript from Kafur Court, whatever date it is, it precedes the date of at least this fragment of the Bakshali manuscript. What that means, I don't know. It's old, it's old. I think that it may be 8th or 9th, it may be older. So what we're doing in analyzing the Raghuvamsha is we're trying to focus on one particular commentary, and it's the commentary of Vallabhadeva. And the reason for selecting Vallabhadeva's commentary is because Vallabhadeva is thought to have lived in the 10th century. That brings him several centuries earlier than Mallinatha. And it seems that his commentary is the earliest commentary on the Raghuvamsha to survive. And it therefore seemed to us when we began, so I should say that I started this work back in, it's difficult even to remember, I'm afraid, but I think it must have been in the 1992. So I've been doing it for a long time with my colleague and friend, Harunaga Isaacson of the University of Hamburg. And since volume 1, we still haven't produced volume 2, but we're intending to produce it next year with chapters 7 through 12. And for that volume, we're joined by Csaba Déső, Hungarian scholar from Budapest, and another Hungarian scholar called Csaba Kiss, currently in Naples. And we have, so we've enlarged the team in order to give us a chance of finishing this edition while we are still alive. What we've been trying to do is focus on Vallabhadeva because Vallabhadeva may, because he's the oldest commentator, have an earlier access to the text, which therefore means that he might be closer, he might reflect a text of Kalidas which is closer to what Kalidasa might have written. And for that, we early on determined that if you look at manuscripts that purport to transmit Vallabhadeva's commentary from different regions, notably Rajasthan, you can find that each manuscript is totally unrelated. And that's a very shocking discovery for us. But I've made the discovery since then with some other commentaries on literary works, that there seems to be no kernel to the text, that there's such variation you can't really even reconstruct some sort of core that might have been the original commentary. But in the case of Vallabhadeva, we discovered that if we weeded out all the manuscripts which are not from Kashmir, then we could just focus on the Kashmirian corpus, and then from that we could construct with difficulty something that might have been what Vallabha wrote in the 10th century. So we focused therefore on Kashmirian manuscripts, which are mostly in Sharda script, and there are some later ones in a sort of block-like Devanagari, which looks a little bit like Sharda, but is in fact Nagari from 18th century Jammu, notably 18th and 19th century Jammu. Anyway, many Kashmirian manuscripts look like this. So I wanted to just emphasize some characteristics of Kashmirian manuscripts, because whatever editing work one does, the manuscripts are so various, and there are all kinds of consequences that follow that have an impact on decisions, editorial decisions that you make, which relate to the form of the manuscripts. So earlier on, Professor Murali Madhavan was speaking primarily about manuscripts from the south on Sri Tala, written, engraved and incised in the surface of the leaf. And there are many consequences of that kind of transmission. So just to illustrate, here is a Kashmirian manuscript nothing particularly special about it, but you notice at once that the thing is very neatly centered in the page. There are, relatively speaking, huge margins. We have the pagination given on the versos, not the rectos in this case. The position actually varies, but it usually is on the verso. But you have lots of space around in these margins for adding notes, and you can see that somebody has indeed added a note, Lakshmi, Vinodati, and so forth, in the margin. And you have also typically numbering, which means a lot of things, but the numbering is also slightly picked up with rubrication. That's to say, you can see somebody has slightly reddened the numbers, and whether you can see my cursor, but there, for example, this number 64 here. So you can, the consequences of this is that you can see that this manuscript belongs to a tradition where you are really encouraged to kind of browse, flip through, find the place, and then you can also make notes. And that has an impact on the way texts are transmitted. If we contrast with a South Indian manuscript taken absolutely at random here, this is one from the French Institute. It's a very beautiful manuscript in many respects. It is a whole library in itself, this RE 40042. It contains lots of different texts, but notice that there is no real possibility for rubrication, except somebody has done it now in modern times with a biro. But in earlier periods, it would have been difficult to rubricate. Notice also that there are no marginal spaces. The text is what they call in Latin scripto continua. That's to say you have everything run together. There's no word spacing. You do not typically have numbers. In this particular manuscript, you don't even have folio numbers, so you have no pagination. And when the thing is all tied up together, you remember this phrase being quoted, Raksha me shitila bandhanat, typically by Professor Mundi Madhavan. Typically, these manuscripts are bound together and tightly strung round. Once you open them out, of course, you can open them fully out, but you can't really flip, nor can you find the place, nor can you annotate anything. And everything militates against flipping and browsing because you have no numbers, you have no word spacing, you often have no indication of changes of text. In a manuscript like this with hundreds of folios and a couple of dozen different texts, finding your place is a nightmare. Yes, so this is just to illustrate how very tightly written it is. I think that there may be there are 12 or maybe it's 18 lines of text. It is fantastic in a way, but it is also extreme. It produces a different sort of culture of literacy. It produces the kind of culture of literacy which some people, when they speak about their learning as children, reflect this. They say, when I studied, we, the pupils, did not have the book. Only the Acharya, the Guru, had the book. Everything was recited, and then we would have to retain it. And then, and I think that this trains the mind in a certain way. What you can do when you learn over years like this is that you can listen to somebody recite a long, complicated stanza in Sragdhara or something, and then you retain it all in your mind, and you can then think about how the elements cohere, how they interrelate, the syntax, the difficulties of vocabulary, because you have the whole thing there, or wherever your contesta may be. But in any case, this, I think, is something which is reinforced by this particular, what we can call now manuscript culture, the South Indian culture of the book. The Kashmirian culture of the book is different. And I think we see this. So what I showed you before was a very, very neat and well produced example. There are all kinds of much sloppier manuscripts in Kashmir, but they typically have the same features. So here again, you can see lots of space in the margins, room for annotation, and people have added this annotation, slight rubrication by rubbing some sort of powder on the numbers. Also, another feature which I didn't mention before, as well as the pagination, we have this kind of running head. So that says Raghu Pa. So that means this section of the book that you're in, it's the Raghuvamsha chapter 5. So all of that information enables you then to flip through, find your place, and then maybe add some notes. Again, contrast with another South Indian example. Everything is very tightly, closely written. The other thing that we should note is that the edges rub away and get eaten by insects, rats, whatever, and then they become damaged, and then you have even fewer indications that help you navigate, because typically, as we were saying, on a South Indian book of this kind, the pagination is added, the foliation is on the front, on the recto, well, it could be on the right margin or the left margin, but whichever margin it's going to be on, it's not going to resist when it gets eaten away. You cannot read it anymore. So that is another feature that makes these books more difficult to use. I think also another obvious feature is that the size of the lettering is means that as you get older, you see that I'm now wearing glasses. It's not possible really to read these things so easily anymore. It takes more strain. And I think another thing that's worth saying is that when you wish to write a note on a Kashmirian manuscript, well, you have your pen, however it's produced, but usually some sort of, not a stylus, but some sort of quill, usually a reed cut into a certain shape, and then ink, and then you write on the surface. That is a technology that it requires a little bit of training, but most people can master quite quickly. If you've ever tried to engrave with a stylus into the surface of a palm leaf, it is a whole different ballgame. It is not like grabbing a biro and scribbling. You have to, so it was mentioned that this Yeritani is a complicated thing, really. It needs a point, it needs this counterweight at the end, and then very often people cut an incision in their thumb and use it as a fulcrum and then hold the leaf in a certain way. I think it's extremely difficult to do. You're not inclined, I think, to quickly grab your stylus and jot a note when there are no margins and you can't find the place and. So you see what I'm getting at. I think that there's something very different about the South Indian culture of literary culture, which is shaped by book production. Sorry, this is not I think I wasn't meant to talk about that. Yes. Kashmir, so remaining on the topic of Kashmirian manuscripts and why this has an effect on transmission. Well, I think when you give all these opportunities, little bits of rubrication here, this is actually rubrication produced by red ink in using dandas. You have these verse numbers. You have half dandas for punctuation, as well as double dundas for fuller punctuation and single dundas in some places. You have all of these means, which mean that visually you can see immediately where you are in the book, and then you have all this space for writing around it. And people did that. They add an enormous amount of annotation. Sometimes it's just a correction of this word, sometimes it's just a gloss. So you have some pratika, which is mysterious or a little bit unfamiliar. Somebody adds a gloss. It could be a student, could be somebody else. But you also have little patches of commentary, relevant quotations from the Amarkosha, relevant quotations from the Ashtadhyayi, all sorts of things. And then sometimes from these glosses, you get a much more elaborate commentary evolves. And I think that it's possible that some commentaries have indeed evolved from essentially marginal annotations. In other cases, you can see that some commentaries have survived in the form of marginal annotations or partially survived. So a colleague of mine, Isabelle Ratier, in Paris, has been working on Abhinav Gupta's works and Utpala Deva's works and showing that a lot of literature has in fact survived in Kashmirian marginal annotations in this way. Yes, one could just mention that it's possible that there is some Islamic influence here. We also have this innovative feature in bookmaking. Although this book is still a little bit elongated, that's to say it resembles a palm leaf in that sort of format, it has a binding. And the binding is another of these features, whereas we don't unpick unwind the string and then gradually, carefully pull apart the palm leaves and then sort through to find where we are. Instead, with a book, with a binding, well, you just flip the pages. And then if you can see, okay, it's page 43 here, and you can see also at the bottom here, this what the text is, because there's a little pratika telling you the name of the text. And you see all the colophons, chapter colophons picked out in different colors and so forth. With all of this apparatus, you are encouraged to study in a different way. Can't remember whether I was going to say anything about that. Yes, alternate letters, the decorative features, these all of that looks a little bit as though it's coming through a different, maybe Islamic influence. Okay, I talked about damage. Another feature of Kashmirian books, at least until the 18th century, but even into the 19th century, they were using birch bark. So this is an example of a birch bark manuscript. And by the way, this is one put online, freely available on archive.org from this e-Gungal, which I was mentioning earlier. Absolutely extraordinary to have this birch bark manuscript of part of the Kadambari. And you can see that we have here, again, this indication, Kadamba. So we know what text we're in, we know where the folio is. And sometimes this might be a chapter indication, but I haven't checked that. So birch bark, of course, also frays and gets damaged, but you can see in many birch bark manuscripts that they have been patched and repaired at the corners like this. And very often you can still write on the patches like this. And I think that that encourages also a different manuscript practice, because whereas with South Indian manuscripts, they get eaten by worms and things at the sides, and then there comes a point where they no longer hold together, and you simply have to produce another copy if you want to continue reading the book. With Kashmirian manuscripts, to some extent that may be true, but this is a very old manuscript. I don't know how old, maybe it's 16th century or something. And you can see that the manuscript life can be extended because I can add a patch here, and then on that patch, I can write the letters which are missing. So in this case, somebody has added a Vaishampayana, and the Vai got cut off because of damage, but we patch it and you can still put it back in again, and the manuscript's life goes on. That obviously has a big impact on transmission, because every time you copy a book, you introduce, whether you want to or not, even however careful you are, Bhagna Prishtha and so forth, you write with great care, you still introduce errors, copying mistakes. It's inevitable. So if you can have a manuscript transmission where the life of each individual manuscript is extended by several centuries, and this is such a tradition, that is another factor which improves transmission. So here's another birch bark manuscript in a slightly more lamentable condition. And here I think that it hasn't been subjected to traditional style repairs in the same way, because for some while it has been in the Bodleian Library in Oxford. And so it is very scrupulously repaired with careful conservationist techniques and so forth, but not patched at the corners and repaired in the way that the other manuscript we saw was. And this is a manuscript of the Raghuvamsha. That's to say, Vallabhadeva's commentary on the Raghuvamsha. And just in passing, yes, you can see how the thing wears off. I was just going to draw attention to the fact that the text is not transmitted in this manuscript. What we have instead is pratikas for each verse. So the first one there, you can see at the top, in the top line, it's a pratika. I mention that just in passing because I have often thought in the past and maybe said that Kashmirian manuscripts typically have the whole commentary and then the verse and then the whole commentary and then the whole verse and so forth. But we do find exceptions to this. We find also others. We find this kind of what I think of as a Jaina style, where you can see that in the middle section here, this is a manuscript in the British Museum in London, which is again Sharada, again from Kashmir, but the middle block of text, which is bolder, written with a thicker nib, is the Mulapatha of the Raghuvamsha, and the what is written on either side is around it is the commentary, the Tika of Vallabha. And that I think of as typically a West Indian, sometimes Jaina kind of technique, where we pick out the Mulapatha by this graphic means. Okay, so all of that, I hope that I'm not running over too much. All of that, what I'm coming to say is how this can influence transmission. So here is a case which, if you've heard me speak before, I'm afraid you might well have seen this example already. It's from chapter 6 of the Raghuvamsha. Notice here is a leaf, a paper Sharada leaf, and you can see that because I think imported probably from this birch bark, this technique of repairing birch bark which frays at the edges, this technique of repairing has been transferred, I think, into the new medium, new some centuries old now, but new in maybe 18th century, of at least in that region, this new medium of paper. And all of this region here has been repaired, patched with other paper. And then people have used it for writing things. And in this case, what have they written? If we examine a little bit closely, you can see that this is a famous verse from, well, it's a verse from chapter 8 of the Raghuvamsha. Chapter 8 of the Raghuvamsha is the Ajja Vilapa, which we think of as the lament of Ajja after the death of Indumati. But before we get to the Ajja Vilapa, we already have Ajja mourning for the death of his father. And this is the verse in which the funeral rites are referred to. Vidadhi chatadaudhadaihikam pitrikaryam pitrikarya kalpavit nahitena patha tanutyajas tanaya varjita pinda kankshinaha. So there are some variants I've indicated at the bottom. In fact, it would be complicated to explain all the factors which are at play in these changes. But in Vallabha's text, we have Vidadhi. In Malinata's, we have Akarocha. And I think that's because, in fact, there's another verse nearby where Malinata's text has Vidadhi, and so to vary the vocabulary, this change has been made. Pitrikaryam is in a lot of the Kashmirian manuscripts, but it's clearly wrong, and it's not reflected by Vallabha's commentary, which I've transcribed there below. What is in fact reflected is the reading common to Malinata, namely Pitri Bhaktya. So the first line, Vidadhi cha tadaudhudaihikam Pitri Bhaktya Pitrikarya kalpavit. So what that means is he performed Vidadhi, the audhudaihikam, that's to say the rite for after death, tadaudhudaihikam, the post-mortuary ritual. He who is pitrikarya kalpavit, he who was knowledgeable about the ritual procedures, kalpa, for following, relating to rites for the ancestors, pitrikarya. We could analyze that different ways. Pitri Bhaktya, he performed it out of devotion to his father, Pitri Bhaktya. And you can see in the commentary there that Vallabha asks the question, third line here, Atha Pitri Bhaktya iti kimuchyate. Yavata Pitara Shadham Akankshanti iti aha. So he's saying, so why, he asked the question, why is it necessary to stipulate he did it out of devotion to his father, Pitri Bhaktya? Because in fact, ancestors require Shraddha. So in other words, why does he need to be motivated by bhakti? Because it's simply a duty, because ancestors require this. And then we have the reply, Yasmat yoga vidhina ye dehatyaginha te putrena apatitam dattam pindam na kadachit abhilashanti ajam amritam hite padamapta nityatripta. Yes, so the point of that is that normally we know that Ajja's father has left this life through yoga, and those who abandon their bodies, dehatyaginaha, by yoga vidhina, by performing yoga, they do not ever, na kadachit, desire abhilashanti, the pindas given by their sons. Why? Ajam amritam hite padamapta nityatriptaha. Essentially, they are eternally satisfied because they have obtained amrita. So in this piece of commentary, what is interesting to note is that we can see that with those insertions that are added all the way around the folio in the margins, the commentary has been transformed by the addition of pratikas. So everywhere we have, where Vallabha's commentary simply had urdhvam dehad bhavam, it's been, and then dasha shraddhadikam. This has been transformed by adding the pratikas from the main text. Audhudaihikam, urdhvam dehad bhavam, audhudaihikam, and so forth. So what you see is that the text has been transmitted and then transformed at a later date in the course of the manuscript's history by the addition of lots of words. And many places we can find that Vallabhadeva's commentary started to get corrupted by this proceeding of adding extra glosses. In this case, we have a further leaf of the same manuscript where, because it can be a little bit confusing to see all of that, some other scribe has added a leaf, this leaf, in which he's written out all the content of this leaf here. He's written it out again, but incorporating all the insertions. So in other words, this is another way of repairing the manuscript, but it's one which can sometimes integrate a whole lot of transmissional changes. That's to say, non-authorial later changes have been sucked into the text here and recopied in such a way that the whole proceeding, all that has happened, is then hidden from the eyes of us, the editors. So in short, it helps, I think, to have this whole picture of Kashmirian manuscripts, how they work, how they're transmitted, how literary culture functions, all these consequences of the particular choices that are made in the layout, because all of that eventually plays into the way we decide to edit the text. In this case, we decide to edit the text by consistently removing pratikas, which seem to us to have been added in the course of transmission. Okay, I have one more example, but please let me know, should I stop at this point? Because I think I've been going on rather a long time. Professor Murali Madhavan, would you like me to continue or, with one more example, or should I stop at this point? I don't know whether the programming is, I cannot hear. So I cannot.
Sir,
Yes,
you
You
can
can
go ahead.
continue.
I can continue. Okay. So I will
Yes,
just
yes.
finish this last example. It's a little bit slightly complex example, but it's one that I haven't shown before, so it might be interesting. So this is an example from chapter 9. Chapter 9 of the Raghuvamsha is the chapter in which Dasharatha goes hunting. And it's in this episode of hunting that he accidentally kills a Brahmin boy. And this results in the curse by the Brahmin boy's parents, father. But before when he's about to set off hunting, there is a lyrical description of spring, of the season of Madhu. And in this lyrical description, it has this feature which some people think of as not being really like Kalidasa at all. And hence there's a lot of discussion about authorial qualities and so forth. It has this anuprasa in the fourth pada of every stanza. We have the syllables 2, 3, and 4 are repeated as syllables 5, 6, and 7. So here in this example, we have Gamayitum Prabhuresha Sukhena Mam. Namahatim Vatapantha Vadhujanaha Iti Dayata Iva Bhavadayata Narajani Rajani Shavati Madhau. So this is spring, Madhau, we're in the last word there. In the season of spring, Madhau, the night, Rajani, the night which is Rajani Shavati, which has moonlight, Rajanisha being the lord of the night and hence the moon. So Chandravati, Rajanishavati, the night thinking to itself, iti, Pantavadhujanaha. What does it think? The contents, the iti, Pantavadhujanaha, the wives Vadhujanaha of travelers, Pantavadhujanaha, alas, Vata, they will not be able, na Prabhu, they will not be capable of passing, of causing to go by, Gamayatum, me, and it's the night speaking. In other words, they will not be able to cause the night to go past quickly. Mam Mahatim, if I am big, if I am long. So the night thinks, Rajini thinks, if I am long, if I am Mahati, then these Aisha Pantavadhujanaha, these wives Vadhujanaha of travelers, alas, they will not be able to go through me easily, sukhena. So with this thought, iti, out of compassion, dayataha, as it were, iva, the night, Rajani, became abhavat, ayata na, that's to say, became not long, not protracted. So, of course, we know that what actually happens in spring is that the days grow longer, and so the nights grow shorter. And here, this is utpreksha, and in this utpreksha, we fancy that it's as though Iva, the night, thought to herself, iti, out of compassion, these ladies will not be able to endure this night if it's long, and therefore I will, in spring, I will reduce, I will become short, I will become na ayata. Beautiful verse, but it is not the verse that you will have seen if you have read Kalidas with Malinata. So you can see that I have an apparatus entry there which gives that verse, but I'll come back to that in a minute. What you can see, interestingly, is in Vallabha's commentary, I hope you can read it here. In Vallabha's commentary, so fourth line here of the commentary, he says, there's this comment on vata, the particle vata or vata, vateti khede, vata meaning alas, in the sense of regret or whatever, torment. Rajani shabdayor ekartatvepi ta paryabhedat bhinnartata iti na yamakadosha. So what he claims is that even though api, there is the quality of having a single meaning, ekartatve, in the two words for Rajani, Rajani Shabdayoho. So by that he means, so we're in the Yamaka portion in the fourth part that you see, Na Rajani, Rajani Shabati Madho. We have two instances of the word Rajani. So even though these two instances of the word, they both have the same meaning, namely night, Rajani, nonetheless, Tapadya Bhedat Bhinnarthata, because they have a different purport, if you like, they nonetheless have a different meaning. Bhinnarthata. There is the quality of having a different meaning in them. So what he means here is that the first instance means night, okay, but in the second instance, we're actually talking about Rajanisha, that's to say the moon, and the night is Rajanishavati. The night possesses moonlight, possesses the moon. It's the spring moon, and it's a very beautiful period. And so he says, iti na yamakadosha, and therefore there is no fault in the yamaka in this place, in the anuprasa. But of course, this is just the kind of remark which ends up by planting a doubt in people's minds. They read that and they think, ah, yes, this verse is really not after all so good, because we now have a problem. Rajani comes twice, and Rajani in both cases means night. And so it's not really very surprising to find in most of the manuscripts that we then have a partantram, and that partantram reads, Opa yayau tanutam madhukandita himakarodaya pandamukhachavihi gamayitum priya sanjanitam vyatham asahaya sahayamavati striya. So here, different, but the same sort of image. What we have here is the night, that's to say Yamavati, she who possesses watches, Yama, Yamavati, Upayayau Tanutam. She went to a condition, Upayayau, a condition of being slender, being thin, being small, Tanutam. The night was qualified as Madhukandita, that's to say reduced by spring, Madhukandita. And Himakarodaya Pandamukhachavihi, her face, the complexion of her face, literally, was pale, Pandu, because of the arising of Himakara, of the moon, the cool maker or something. At least this is one way you could analyze this compound. So the night has become somehow pale-faced by the rising of the moon. Gamayetum priya sanjanitam vyatam, in order to cause to pass by, gamayetum, the suffering, vyatam, which is caused, sanjanitam, by beloveds, understand by the absence of those beloveds, and which because so that this night can be caused to be gone by, by these ladies, triya singular, who are asahaya, who are not able to tolerate it. Okay, so a completely different version, and now we have a different yamaka where it reads asahaya sahaya. So far, so good. But I'll come back to this in a second. So just to show you, these are a couple of the manuscripts. And again, we have one of these paper manuscripts where the margins have been repaired. And so all of this is written partly on the old portion, partly in the repair. I'm not going to dwell on that. I just wanted to say a word about this article, which I think is very interesting, new, relatively recent article. Until now, I have often been, when I talk about the Raghuvamsha and the changes in it, I have often been talking about how they are motivated by perceived errors. That's to say, we spot some grammatical error, or we spot some yamaka dosha, as in this case, or we see some geographical problem where the reference to Kerala Yoshitam, for example, in chapter 4 becomes, in the Kerala commentators, Cholaka Yoshitam. Why? Because it follows immediately after Raghu has crossed the Kaveri. And there's this feeling, okay, we cannot have the Kaveri crossed and then he's suddenly among the Keralas. So they change it to, at least I believe it's been changed for that reason, to Cholaka. In other words, I have over the years been gathering all these different instances of changes, in many cases arguing that they are motivated by problems in the text. But I think that it's often a little bit more complicated than that. I think that there is also this tendency to produce imitation verses, a little bit like the tradition of Samasya Purana, where people take some beautiful passage and then they creatively riff upon it and are encouraged to produce other versions. And this article is an interesting one for me. It's by Richard Salomon, and it's about Ashwaghosa's Mahakavyas. And he demonstrates here that there are a number of verses which have been, so here's just one example that he gives. I'm not going to read it, but it's an example where you can demonstrate, as he shows in this paragraph that's visible at the bottom of the screen, you can demonstrate that this one of these verses really is later because it's missing in Central Asian fragments. And you can see that the two verses basically say exactly the same thing, but we end up with both of them in the transmission. And very often, I think, when you reach the period of Malinatha's commentary of the Raghuvamsha, what has happened is that the verse of all the different competing versions, the verse which is felt to be the most satisfying is the one which in the end is preserved by Malinatha and commented on. And in some cases, this is the oldest version, but in many cases, it is not the oldest version. And I think, in other words, it is not always necessary that there should be some big problem with a verse. Sometimes there might be some minor problem, but another factor is that people have traditionally created verses that are inspired by the verses of the great poets. And I think that this happened particularly with the Meghaduta. And I think that this is obvious why, because the Meghaduta is a sort of lyrical, not very narrative driven rumination on a theme in Mandakranta. So it has a very particular constrained literary form. It is absolutely, I mean, it's bewilderingly beautiful. And one feels the need, therefore, to add to this corpus of beautiful verses by producing new beautiful verses which do the same sort of thing. And indeed, if you look at the transmission of the Meghaduta, and this is well known, there are hundreds of extra verses, or there is more than 100. I mean, there are different pathas, and they all include or exclude different verses. And so it's very complicated to decide how to construe that text. And in a way, chapter 9 of the Raghuvamsha is similar, because it is again, it's a reflection on a mood. In this case, the mood is not the rainy season with the cloud apostrophizing, oh sorry, the yaksha apostrophizing the cloud, and everything is somehow painting this inexpressibly beautiful portrait of the geography in the monsoon time. Here we have all of this exciting spring atmosphere with different plants, the kokilas and so forth, and we have a very constrained form. We do not have Mandakranta, but we have Druta Vilambita, this beautiful meter, Druta Vilambita, which again is a kind of springing, tripping meter, suggesting spring, and reinforced by this yamaka of syllables 2, 3, 4, repeated in 4, 5, 6, 7 in the fourth pada. The effect is absolutely mesmerizing, I think. I mean, many people do not like this and say, oh, this is not Kalidasa. I have no opinion about that question at the moment, but I do think it's very beautiful. And I think that this passage, rather like Meghaduta, you find lots of different orderings, and you find a lot of verses which are different in Malinata's Pata, different in Himadri's Pata, different in Aranagirinata's Pata, different in Vallabhadeva's Pata. Okay, so this is my final slide. You'll be relieved to hear. So I've given you here Malinata's Pata, and it is different again. So I wanted to indicate that. I think what has happened, so I'll read it first. Opaya yau tanutam mukha khandita, himakarode pandamukhachavihi, sadrisham ishta samagama sadrisham ishta samagama nirvritim, vanitaya nitaya rajani vadhu. So this is the version which has arrived on our desks in our libraries and which everybody reads when they read this chapter. You can see that its first line is exactly the same as in the Partantra quoted by Vallabha, but the third line is different again, and what has been changed, well, several things. Now it's Rajanivadhu, so we make explicit that this it's a sort of upama samasa, if you like. The woman who is the night, Rajanivadhu, she upayayau tanutam, like sadrisham, in a similar way to a vanitaya. So sadrisham vanitaya, in a similar way with a woman, vanitaya, who does not attain anitaya. So this is apraptaya, who has not attained. What has she not attained? Ishta samagama nirvritim. That's to say, the bliss nirvritim of uniting samagama with her Ishta, with her beloved. So here what has happened is that we have the knight compared explicitly to a woman who, similarly to a woman who has not received this bliss of being with her beloved, she goes to thinness, upayayao tanutam. It's quite complicated what has happened here. I think there is a kind of densification. The verses become thicker. There is more ornament. There is this comparison between a lady who becomes thin because she is separated from her beloved with the night, which was maybe implicit in some of these earlier versions, but it really is different. And we have a slightly more strained, I would say, yamaka, because it depends on this vanitaya and then anitaya, using the verb I, to go, in this form, which is a little bit precious, I would say, and maybe not so typical of Kalidasa's usage, though that I do not know. In any case, it's a very different verse from what we started with, and yet it is a verse which clearly has the same kernel of an idea. That's to say, it's the idea that ladies separated from their traveling husbands in spring cannot endure this separation, and so the night, it is fancied, makes herself thin. But it does it in an entirely different way. So I concluded this verse just by saying, even in the great classics, and I feel that the Raghuvamsha is one of the greatest classics in literature, I think that working with manuscripts still holds out an enormous range of possibilities. There is simply the hundreds of things to be done, all these 50-odd pre-modern commentaries unpublished. And all of this work, of course, is very labor-intensive and takes a lot of time, and I think requires also a lot of thought. You cannot rush some of these things. You can collate quickly, but you cannot go through all the different mental processes which are required to arrive at not certainties, but good hypotheses about the evolution of the text and what this means. And but one needs to pay attention to the formal features of manuscripts. So this discipline of manuscriptology can be very important insofar as it helps us understand the nature of the transmission in different cases. And I would say that in this particular case, there are the features of Kashmirian transmission are very important in how Vallabha's commentary has evolved and how the Raghuvamsha itself has been transmitted in Kashmir. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Professor Goodall, for such an informative deliberation on the possibilities and challenges of manuscript studies and research. You started with various collections of manuscripts in India, as in India, Cambodia, and Nepal, and a special mention was given to Nishwasa Samhita in the first, and then passed through its features, its special features, and other resources on manuscripts, the NCC, etc., and digital presentation of different manuscripts, and finally, the project being carried out by Brahmaswam Matham Thrissur, and finally you went to the Kalidasa and entered in the Kalidasa. that was very good. Almost all the talks will be entered in Kalidasa. In one or more cases, in one or more ways, it will be in Kalidasa that we will conclude. So it was very informative, and especially for the study on the students on manuscript studies. You have given a very good idea regarding its repositories, its the possibilities and challenges, its documentation, etc., etc. So once again, thank you very much for such a presentation. And now it's the time for discussion. And I invite all the dignitaries to participate in the discussion. And I request Professor Murali Madhavan to commence the discussion.
Yes. Thank you, Professor Goodall ji. Actually, you have proved one more thing today. Can you hear? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Professor Dominic Goodall ji has proved one more thing, which I don't know. I think I know him as a very good what we call a scholar in textual criticism, a very good scholar in Sanskrit and allied subjects, an expert in manuscript, and a scholar worked throughout his life for some classical works like Raghuvamsha and like that for several decades. But today, it was astonishing aspect that I could realize from him that he is a very good critical editor, and more than that, he is a very good connoisseur, a very good sahridaya. He proved beyond doubt, and his lecture ended with Kalidasa. The third part of his lecture was mainly on Kalidasa and Raghuvamsha. Even though he was speaking about Raghuvamsha, he was talking about Makaduda and other texts also. And I think the expositions that he made about the aesthetic principles of Kalidasa, they quoting several aspects of Mandakranda and also the Duta Kavya, Magaduda. It was something very interesting, and what we rarely come across among scholars. Scholars will be talking about several scientific principles and the theories at length. But when they come to their practical field of explaining the meaning of the text, they sometimes they mostly fail there. But here I could see Professor Dominic Goodall ji giving very proper in finding the real text, the real reading, the proper reading. There is always a problem in the field of textual criticism, that there are two approaches. The approaches in West and approaches in East are somewhat different. I think Dr. Goodall may agree with my points, or he can differ also. There is no doubt about it. The thing is that the Occident scholars, the scholars, Western scholars or European scholars, they arrive at, they inquire the real Padha, what would have written by the author. But in India, mostly the scholars, because of their scholarship, they want to improve the Padhas. Sometimes they improve even the original Padha of the scholar, what is already written by the poet. They will improve with their scholarship. So they are scholars and they improve, and they say that what should have written, that was the principle, guiding principle of Indian editors. So this gulf of difference between the Occident and the Orient in approaches of critical textual criticism, principles of textual criticism, I think I want to hear some remark from Dr. Goodall, what he feels, because he is rightly in the field, He is not talking about abundant, we can talk 1 hour or 2 hours on principles of textual criticism. But after all, what is principles of criticism? It is simply a codified common sense. It is nothing but simply a codified common sense. So sometimes you have to apply your common sense, and you have to sometimes deviate from the already written principles. There are well laid principles were there, or doctrines are there, principles are there, theories are there, but we have to deviate according to the situation. So I want to hear, I think this is the pertinent question. I want to get it, the opinion of, the scholarly opinion of Professor Goodall regarding the difference between, because we know very well, we have abundant commentaries. The Professor Goodall was talking about more than 50 or 60 commentaries on Raghuvamsha. Still there are something to be unearthed. Still there are several, they are lying in oblivion. But the critical approach, the science of critical edition was first implemented by Western scholars. And in the beginning, we know in the 18th and 19th century, even 20th century, we had several classical works like Arthashastra, Natyashastra. Several classical works were being edited properly by scholars from West. Their approach and Indian approach have some difference. When you take Ramakrishna Kavi, who has edited the Natyashastra, and we have a different culture altogether. We have come across at a later stage in India, while the Pune, the Deccan College of Pune, they have taken up rightly taken up by our what we call Suptangar, while editing Mahabharata text. There you can see a beautiful fusion of a befitting a beautiful, somewhat very reasonable fusion of West and East principles as far as a critical edition is concerned. So I think in India also that type of change has taken place. But in the beginning, from the very beginning, when the scholars, even regional scholars like Kutika Shamarar and such people in Kerala, though Kutika Shamarar is the leading scholar who edited, entirely critically edited the Kalidasa works totally, not only Raghuvamsha and Kumarasambhava, all works. So what I want to hear from you, or some scholastic, what we call expression, as far as concerned, that how we can discriminate these two approaches, and what should be the ideal approach as far as a critical edition is concerned. Anyway, there are some other questions that I will, if time permits, I will. It is not question. Sometimes it's adding something to your what is already presented, or something. That's all. Nothing more than that. But I am very happy that today we spend the time very meaningfully, and hearing from the very horse mouth the practical problems in editing a text, citing examples from Raghuvamsha, then what to speak about it, that is the model work for us, in front of us. As far as there are several in finding the real padhas, the original readings, several scholars have put effort in that, and very few have succeeded in arriving at the real padha. So with these observations, I beg to remain. I will, I think you can answer all the questions at the end. If anybody wants to put any question or any clarification, let them put it, and you can note it, and finally you can speak. I think that is better, perhaps. So as the chair of the session, I would like to request the participants online to give your opinion, your comments, your questions. If you want anything to what we call any kind of commission or omission in the presentation, all you can mention about it, and any corrections or any more valid clarification in any subject, any point that he presented by Dr. Goodall, you can very well present now. This is the time. Now the presentation is open for discussion.
I see one question in the chat about whether the commentaries on the Raghuvamsha fall into two groups, Hindu and Jaina. I haven't observed this. I mean, it is true that there are Jaina commentaries. There is, and one of the ones that's published is by somebody called Jina Samudra. But in terms of type, I'm not sure in what way it would fall into another group. I think that it has one thing in common that I've seen in one or two other Jaina commentaries, that it's very school bookish, not very sophisticated. But in terms of the readings that it reflects, it's very close, in fact, to Vallabhadeva. I know that there are some other Jaina commentaries, but I haven't studied them enough. As I was saying, more than 50 pre-modern commentaries, and one of the reasons why it's so difficult to add meaningful things that you were just saying, so that it's difficult to improve on the readings and difficult to, well, I think the reason is that it's such a lot of work, because a lot of the individual manuscripts on the Raghuvamsha are not so significant. But what is very significant in deciding how to constitute the text is the judgments of all these different commentators through time for 10 centuries or so. And but establishing what they thought requires in each case editing their commentary. And that is simply a huge labor. The text is itself quite long for, 19 sargas, and then you add commentary on all of those. There is simply a lot of work. And we have been working as a team on the Raghuvamsha with the commentary of Vallabhadeva. Okay, it's not doing it full time, but we've been working at it for a long time, and we are a team of now 4 people. I think that these things, to collate everything, think about it, it can take an enormous quantity of time. So I think that there are other Jaina commentaries which should certainly be examined and thought about. Some of them, one of the reasons why I have not looked at them so much is that they tend to be a little bit later, so 17th, 18th century. And since one of the things I'm interested in is Vallabha's reading, which is 10th century, it's less immediately important than looking at some of the earlier commentators.
Yes.
Um,
If any question you can ask, or if it is not sent to chat box, you can directly ask also.
Okay.
Sir, I okay.
Namaste Murali Mohanji and Goodall ji. Can you hear me?
Indeed,
Yes,
yes.
you can
Namaste.
hear.
Okay.
I am Murali Madhavan.
Murali Madhavan ji. Yes, yes, yes. Okay. Sir, I think it is excellent, excellent to end with Raghuvamsha, Navama Sarga. It is absolutely beautiful. And then last shloka, I think he seems to show his dissatisfaction. Vanitaya, Nitaya, Sadrusham, Tanutam Upayayav. I think Vanitaya, Nitaya, Vanitaya, Anitaya, Tanutam, Anitaya, Vanitaya, Sadrusham, something. I think it also, Yamaka is maintained and meaning also beautiful. I think this is Malinadha's version as you showed. Also, it is. I think it is beautiful, but even then, other examples what is given and the explanation, everything attracted me. And first tantra, and then to end with Raghuvamsha, it is really beautiful. But if it is reversed, may not be. It may not be so. So I think it is. I am appreciating him and appreciating the organizers. Such a beautiful webinar. Something, sir. It is absolutely useful, and from every from the beginning up to the end, every letter I relished. That is, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Can you give your introduction, personal introduction?
Oh, sorry. Sir, I am Anjaneya Sharma, SLP Anjaneya Sharma from Pondicherry, EFEO, working under Dominic Goodall ji.
I know Anjaneya Sharma ji. I know you personally, but I want to others should know who is talking. It is for others. I know you very well.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. We met in Delhi.
Thank you for your observation. We want scholars like you to participate in such thought-provoking academic discussions.
Yes,
Anjaneya Sharma ji, people
Yes,
like
yes,
you
sir.
should be there. Yes. And we are happy that your head of the institution has come and gave a wonderful lecture.
Really, sir, I never. Okay, I know him. I know my.
Actually, Anjaneya Sharma ji, actually, I have shared with the Professor Goodall platform in several functions. But
I
this
see.
is the first time I am getting his additional quality of arriving at the real Pada and also as a good connoisseur from the standpoint of a connoisseur, a Sahridaya.
Yes, sir.
Ah.
Yes, sir. Yes,
that is very, very important. Yes.
Sahridayata. Yeah.
Sahridaya is the net result of a kavya.
Sir, just one more thing to add. It may or may not be accepted by our Dominic Goodall, sir. First, you raised a question. We, in Indian tradition, improve the text. In Western method, they try to find the original text whether it is good or not, anyway, I think they want to go back. We want to go some sweetest thing side. For that example, you see our Mahibhabhatta criticized Kalidasa shlokas from many kavyas, not only Mahibhabhatta, Kiratarjuniya and etc. I think always he proposes good readings which are useful for rasasvada and improvement of alankara, etc. And also Vakrokti Jivita. Those people, they never tried to find what is original reading.
No, the problem is that if you are not arriving at the real part of what is already written by the author, we cannot have a higher criticism. Higher criticism is based on lower criticism, and lower criticism is the essence of that is arriving at the real patha. We can improve patha. That is another literary genre. You can improve your patha, and that will be your patha.
Okay, that is okay. Even Mahibhabhatta shows original one, and he finds defects in them, and he proposes new.
Yeah. Such attempts are appreciated. Yeah.
I think also that it's a spectrum. I mean, one cannot, of course, by independency, this is Western, this is Eastern. But I mean, we see also, apart from Mahibhabhatta is indeed extremely critical, but always gives you what he regards as the criticized text, even if he then proposes a new reading. I think it's the same or similar with Vallabha. He quite often says this or that part is pramadat, because of mistake. Sometimes in such cases, he doesn't even propose an improvement. He simply shows that the thing is not a good reading because of this or that grammatical consideration. So I think that he's on this tendency of showing the way the text has been received by him without trying to improve it. Whereas other people make the judgment, this is sweeter, this is more beautiful, and then therefore this must be original, and everything else is a kshepaka or upper part. So I think that we have the whole range of, as you were saying, in fact, textual criticism is really the application of common sense to what you have in front of you as the means for reading. And one of the big differences between the West, if you like, and the East is not really a difference in attitude in that point. I think it's simply that our access to things has changed. And I mean, the critical editions that first appeared in the West of Greek and Latin texts, they started to note that this particular manuscript kept in this particular library in this particular country had such a reading, because it was possible, because a world had been entered in which things had relatively fixed places in libraries, and you could then start to then label readings in this way. If you imagine in Vallabha's time in 10th century, he has access just to a few manuscripts from Kashmir, but the whole transmission is so vast, and he cannot see the manuscripts in South India. It's somehow now, because of travel, photography, all these changes, we can suddenly, I mean, I can look at hundreds of manuscripts of the Raghuvamsha if I want to. And that changes things. It necessarily entails a change in methodology. So it's not so much that, I mean, I take your point, but I think that it's not just to be seen in terms of a certain kind of mindset, questing for the original at all cost, even if it means a text that's less attractive. And on the one side, whereas a tendency to wish to improve, to make sweeter, to adopt always that which we like, regardless of whether it's original. I mean, those tendencies are there. But as I say, I think it's a spectrum that one can observe within Indian authors themselves. I think we find people who are more critical, like Vallabha, and people who smooth over things more, like on the other end, Malinath, I think. But nonetheless, the difference has to do with all kinds of other things about the way books are available to us. And now, in this day and age, with all of these things coming online and becoming accessible through photography, one really hopes that there will be a revolution of attitude in India itself, and that people will more largely edit things giving sources. I mean, in the end, when you produce an edition, what you put above the line is the editor's choice. And you can have all kinds of mistakes and things in that. But if you are also recording what all the manuscripts have, then your work is going to be meritorious and useful for future generations anyway.
Yeah,
And,
correct.
so even if you have the view, okay, I will make it as sweet as possible, regardless of whether this is original, you can put that above the line. But as long as you then report also what the evidence is, then other people can work with it and they can have other suppositions about the text. The text that goes above the line in a critical edition is the editor's hypothesis. It is often a sort of personal view of what this or that text should look like. Sometimes one feels this is very authoritative, this is very good, but one never feels that is the text that Kalidasa wrote. One simply feels that is so-and-so's theory about what this text was.
Thank you. Yes. Any other questions?
I see some questions in the chat, but I haven't fully had time to read them. Something about how the procedure of forensic works involved in determining provenance, dating, authenticity, forgeries and pseudotexts. Well, I have very little experience of that, except with inscriptions. I don't know how much market there is for forging manuscripts. I think that we see forged manuscripts in on the art market, when they tend to be manuscripts which contain some text and then some irrelevantly people have added illustrations so as to make the text more saleable. But forgeries of other kinds, well, as I say, I'm aware of inscriptions which are forged. Particularly, I have seen a number of forged Cambodian inscriptions, where again the reason is to sell them on the international art market. So there are not enough inscriptions to go around if you are an art dealer wishing to make money out of them. And so some people resort to making fakes. And but the cases I've seen have been very clear-cut cases in the main, where you can determine that the thing is fake because of the letters are poorly copied and the text does not make sense. And very often there are this historiation in the sense of for inscriptions means that there's some portion which contains some decoration, some image of Vinayaka or something, which is incorporated into some into the top of the stela, for example. And that's obviously something which increases the thing of the saleability of the object from the point of view of some rich buyer who simply wants a decorative object to place in his hall or his living room or something. And that person can then, see the beautiful sculpture and know that it's, or have the belief that this is an old inscription from Cambodia. So, so when you see historiated stelae on the art market, which then have a text that you try and read and you quickly establish the letters are badly shaped, you can then very often, in fact, search through the corpus and find the source from which somebody has copied the text. But in manuscripts, I'm not aware of, there's nobody interested in forging. I mean, at least for the moment, there isn't money in it to the same degree. And therefore people are not, as far as I'm aware, not forging such documents, but perhaps you have seen forged manuscripts.
Good. If you are not having any other question.
Thank you, Murlimar sir.
Yes.
I want to say one point. As Dr.
Yeah,
Goodall,
surely.
as Dr. Goodall said, the approach of the Occidental and the Oriental may not be having some differences, because in Oriental text also, as far as we are concerning about the
So I cannot hear at the moment.
Yeah, we cannot hear her. I think it became mute.
One second.
See, Narayan Putty, your system muted, I think so. You unmute,
second.
please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yes, thank you. Murali Madhavan sir, you raised a point
Yes,
that certain difference in
yes,
approach in the manuscript making in Occidental and Oriental. Here, much
yes,
additions are later included. But that may not be true as far as the Vedic texts are concerned. Even though thousands of years before the manuscripting making of Vedic text started, they kept accuracy and they were accurate to the original. So these Prakshipta, adding the Prakshiptas maybe happened after later years. Maybe in literary pieces or the Smritis, also some Prakshiptas we are seeing. So the approach to manuscript in Occidental Oriental, as Dr. Goodall said, it may not be some such differences as far as Vallabha's sincerity and its unique approach to stick on the original. That point, Dr. Goodall said. And another point, I am, as being the president of Kantaloor Sala, I am very much indebted to such a scholastic presentation of Dr. Goodall. And as Dr. Murali Madhavan said, you are not only a manuscriptologist and a scholar, a Sanskrit Pandit, and Sagrada, a good connoisseur. You explain all this literary criticism and aswadanam through your heart, and we all felt it. Thank you, sir. Then another point, in Kantaloor Sala is situated in Trivandrum, and here much manuscripts were found in the beginning of this century by Ganapati Shastrigal. You might have heard about this Trivandrum series. And Kantaloor Sala was a world university also. So here also there was a tradition of keeping manuscripts, and Bhasa, the Bhasa Nadaga Chakram, published by Ganapati Shastrigal, first from Trivandrum. And Agnivesha Griha Sutram found only found from Trivandrum, and some Buddhist texts also. Many had heard about that book, but they couldn't find it. But actually, in the beginning of the century, Ganapati Shastrigal found this from Manalikara, a Namburi Illam, and they published as Trivandrum series many of the things. I particularly interested to know Dr. Goodall's opinion about the characteristics of these manuscripts of Trivandrum series. Thank you.
So thank you for that question. I'm afraid I'm not really competent to talk about the manuscripts in the Trivandrum collection. I have seen some of them, of course, and they often very significant ones. As we know, such unique survivals, the Pashupata Sutras, the Manjushriya Moolakalpa, very important documents appeared in the Trivandrum Sanskrit series. But as for the manuscripts, in many cases, I haven't seen them. The Manjushri Moolakalpa I have seen, and it's clearly, it's an old manuscript from central India on palm leaf. So I don't know the history of how the different manuscripts arrived is probably very complicated. I know that the Trivandrum collection is of very great importance, but I cannot really comment on the whole thing. As for, yes, you mentioned so that the difference in different text types invite, of course, very different treatment. And it's clear, as you were implying, Mahima Bhatta invites changes to the text partly because he is looking at literary documents, and he is trying to determine how different literary figures work and then show how there are problems when one does them in the wrong way, and then he proposes some alternative. Clearly, he would never do that if he were reading a Vedic text. That is quite clear.
Thank you for balancing an impartial approach. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. I think.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes.
Dominic Goodall, it's me, Ajitan.
Hello.
Hello.
Happy to see you after a long time. That is, now it is online. So I have a question. It's related to first part of your presentation. You have made a passing reference to Rudra Ganika. I would like to know much about how the text refer to Rudra Ganika and what is the description. The descriptions found out in Rudra Ganika, are they Devadasis? That is my first question. And another question is the forthcoming editions of Nishwasa Samhita. Then how you plan to publish them, in how many editions will be there, and what is the next forthcoming edition? Thank you.
Yes, well, thank you very much for both those questions. The Nishwasa, all that we have published, we have published 2 large volumes, but it covers only, both volumes together cover the first 44 folios, and the manuscript itself is 144 folios long. I have an edition already, but the thing is that it's my experience that it's in reading again and again and again and rethinking gradually over a long period of time that certain issues and the interpretation becomes clearer, gains focus. I think that, and I really need to keep reading it and at the end come up with some addition, but I'm not inclined to rush it. So I don't know how long it will take. But people tell me I have a very bad habit of writing volume 1s, and then I never get around to doing volume 2. And this is true. I mean, it's fascinating to explore a new transmissional situation. So I produced volume 1 of the Kirna, volume 1 of the Raghuvamsha with the Panchika, volume 1 of the Nishwasa. It takes time. I'm hoping that I will live long enough to finish some of these projects. But I also get distracted. It is true that getting distracted is not necessarily a good thing, but I think it's actually a little bit necessary in reading, because you do need to have a wider experience in order to make good judgments, I think. So it has disadvantages and advantages, but I would say maybe 10 years from now, I hope to have a final volume of the Nishwasa covering this section of the text called the Guhya Sutra. It's very, it's full of what seem like rather magical recipes, and they require more thought. As for the question of Rudra Ganikas, I've written an article in 2018 about the evidence through time. I think that it changes. I think that the earliest reference that I have found to Rudra Ganikas is in the Shivadharmottara. The Shivadharmottara, which I believe dates to the 7th century, and which we are now editing, a great team of people under Florinda de Simini in Naples. And there it's quite clear that Rudra Ganika is the term for somebody who has been bought or sold or captured into temple service. There's a list as an explanation. It's also clear that the person in question is her descendants are also born into temple service. So it's some sort of system of temple service, and Rudra Ganika is, but there is no specification of what the functions are, the Rudra Ganika. It's in much later texts of the 12th century later that you find it explicitly said that Rudra Ganikas dance and sing and entertain. And sometimes they are quite clearly distinguished from Devadasi in some texts, because there's some sort of hierarchy. In cases of the Rudra Ganikas who are said to dance and sing and so forth and are musicians, and then there are other ladies who do other work in the temple. So although in the Shivadharmottara we don't find evidence of this distinction, we do find it in plenty of other sources. And So I have produced an article trying to gather together all the different sorts of evidence from Cambodian inscriptions, from the Kuttanimata, which is rather a rich source for that sort of information. This novel of the 8th century by the Kashmirian author Damodar Gupta, and then different agamas from different dates which mention Rudraganikas. And I think what emerges is that there isn't one answer to your question. I think it changes in every period, in every area. There are slightly different conditions. But what is typical is that in temples, a lot of ladies were employed. Some of these ladies were regarded as being in hereditary service, and that there was very often a strong hierarchy. And the evidence of naming conventions in Cambodian inscriptions suggests that the musicians and the dancers, and these were very highly educated ladies, and they often had names of the format Vasanta Sena and so forth, which we know from classical literature, notably from the Mritya Katika, was a name for often wealthy, well-educated Sanskrit-speaking ladies who were courtesans. And so we can, whereas the names of the ladies whom it's explicitly said that they cleaned or did agricultural labor, those names are vernacular names. They're not names in Sanskrit. They do not have this form of a courtly name like Vasanta Sena, these names ending in Sena. In the Natya Shastra commentaries, you have references to different conventions for how courtesans, wealthy courtesans, should be named. And there are various other types of name ending like Mitra and so Sena, I can't remember some of the others. But there is a certain naming convention for wealthy, highly educated ladies who are the people who dance. And they're often distinguished, and there is a hierarchy from other ladies who belong in some sense to the god of the temple. So the term Ganika is a very complicated term. In fact, there is also evidence in Vallabha's commentary on the Meghaduta, because the passage where the cloud arrives above Ujjain, or is imagined arriving at the shrine of Ujjain, he identifies the ladies who are waving their chauris, the chamara. He identifies them as Bhagavad Ganikaha, implying that for Vallabha also, this term Ganika attached to a deity name referred to ladies in service to the temple, but specifically educated ladies who were part of a tradition of music.
Thank you, Goodall. Could you tell me the title of your article and
I can
publication
send it
details?
to you. It's in the Krakow Indological Journal. I can send it to you.
Yeah, it would be of great help if you could send it to me.
It has Rudra Ganika in the title.
And are they belonging to a particular caste? Is there any such?
Well, I've also tried to discuss that, but I think that the implication is that, I think that these things change over time. I think that in the earliest period, it's very explicit that these ladies are simply ladies who have been bought or given in payment of a debt, or they've been captured in battle and then given to a temple, all these different situations, or they might come and give themselves. But the implication of that is that it's a totally random collection. That's to say, in terms of caste background, there's no, whereas in later, some South Indian texts, you have the implication that there are questions of caste. And particularly, but these are things I don't really know the answers to, but I think again, this is an issue which there probably is no simple answer. It probably changes over time and according to different periods. We know that there would be different conditions in Orissa, different conditions in Kerala, different conditions in Kashmir. But the evidence of the Shivadhanmotra, which I think is the earliest Sanskrit text which explicitly gives information in the 7th century, is that these ladies were acquired property by the god and came from different backgrounds according to different situations. They found themselves in temple service.
Thank you.
Good. So it is good that Dr. Ajidan, I think now we can move to the final stage. I request Dr. P.I. Ajidan, a faculty member of Kantaloor Sala, to present the citation given in honor of Dr. DOMINIC GOODALL ji. Dr. Ajidan.
With appreciation and respect, Kantaloor Sala highly commends Dr. Dominic Goodall for his outstanding contribution and exemplary work in Vedic literature as a Sanskrit scholar, historian, writer, and teacher. Dr. Dominic Goodall is a Sanskritist and historian of religion who has been a member of the French School of Asian Studies since 2000. He became head of the Pondicherry Center of the EFEO in 2002, where he remained until April 2011. Then posted in Paris from 2011 to 2015, he gave lectures at religious science section, principally on Cambodian inscriptions in Sanskrit and on the history of Shaivism from unpublished sources. He is now once again posted in Pondicherry, where he continues to pursue his scholarly interests, in particular in Sanskrit poetry and in the history of Shaiva Siddhanta. Among his publications are editions and translations of works of poetry in Sanskrit and of hitherto unpublished Shaiva scriptures and theological commentaries. He is a professor at EFEO, co-editor with Dr. Marian Restelli of Venice Dictionary of Tantric Terminology, the Tantrika Abhidhana Kosha, and a contributor to the Hamburg Encyclopedia of Manuscript Cultures in Asia and Africa. He is currently working in two projects funded by the European Research Council, namely Dharma and Shiva-Dharma. In May 2016, he was elected foreign corresponding member of the Academy des Inscriptions at Belles Lettres. This citation is presented to Dr. Dominic Goodall on Saturday, 22 January 2022 at Trivandrum. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ajithan. Now I request Dr. G. Srividya, head of the Department of Sanskrit in Sri Shankaracharya University of Sanskrit, Kaladi, to propose vote of thanks.
And good evening to one and all. The 13th lecture in the lecture series of Indian intellectual tradition comes to a close now. Let me take this opportunity to thank each and everyone who dedicate their time and effort to make this event a successful one. First of all, let me thank our guest of honor, Dr. Dominic Goodall, head of EFCO, French School of Asian Studies, Pondicherry, for delivering a lecture on possibilities and challenges in manuscript studies and research. We are grateful to you, sir, for giving us invaluable insights into the areas of research to be carried out in the field of manuscriptology, and also for sharing some points to tackle the challenges, highlighting the application. Actually, in 3 segments, sir was mentioning about the manuscripts and inscriptions, which talk a lot about the past. Thank you, sir, for making us known about Nishwasa Samhita and its peculiarities. We are indebted to you, sir, for motivating us to explore NGMCP online database, e-Gangotri Digital Preservation Trust project, etc. Also, we thank you for sharing the details about the many commentaries of Kalidasa's Raghuvamsha and some of its salient features and revelations and discoveries arrived at while comparing the manuscripts. Thank you so much, sir, for such an inspiring lecture, and may God bless you to complete all your dream projects. Now I thank Dr. Ravindran sir, Professor of Sanskrit Sahitya, Sri Shankaracharya University of Sanskrit Kaladi, for welcoming this virtual gathering and coordinating this session. Thank you so much, sir. Now I thank Dr. P.Z. Murli Madhavan sir, Director-in-Chief, Kantaloor Sala, for presiding over this meeting, and also for his introductory remarks, especially about the significance of Kerala manuscripts along with some historical incidents. Thank you so much, sir. I thank Dr. Ajithan PI, faculty of Kantaloor Sala, for presenting the citation to our honorable speaker. Thank you, sir. I also thank Dr. Sarita Maheshwaran, Head Sanskrit Sahitya, Government Sanskrit College, Tripunithura, for rendering the invocation. Last but not the least, I thank each and every participant who joined online to be part of this session and making the discussion so live. Now, let me conclude with the hope to carry out meaningful research in the field of manuscriptology. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Srividya, for
you, sir.
your befitting words. And now I request Dr. Ajitan to recite the Shanti Patha.
Bhadram karnebhi shrunuyama deva bhadram pashyemakshabhijyajatraha sthirairangaistuštuvamsastanubhirvyasema devahitam yadayuhu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.
Thank you, Dr. Goodall for your
Thank you,
scholarly presence and scholarly presentation, and the way in which you have faced the questions and answered with the most propriety. You have showed in presenting as a well-balanced scholar. It was really appreciating one, and we want to hear you more in days to come. And Kantaloor Sala will be constantly contacting you for your scholarly guidance. Thank you. As the director, I express my gratitude to you, sir. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, one and all.